Good evening and welcome to the first session of our new study on understanding the Holy Trinity. It's based on a book I wrote 10 years ago or more, I don't know, called The Trinity Untangled. And what tonight is going to be is just an introduction into the subject. I've written a bunch of books on a bunch of different things, but the subject of the Trinity is one that is near and dear to my heart and has been for 45 years or more. I really got into studying the Trinity when I was 20 years old in Bible college, and I'm going to tell you about that in a minute, and I've not stopped since then. And so what I'm going to be teaching over the next several weeks, I've written a book about. I have taught seminars all over, literally all over the world on this subject, in Mexico and the Philippines and Germany and all over the United States. I've written bits and pieces about it before I ever wrote the book. I've communicated with a lot of people on this subject, and it's a very important subject, and there are two reasons that I think it's so important I'm going to tell you about tonight. The first reason is what I would call basic Christian ignorance. This is a foundational doctrine, the Trinity. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, understanding the Trinity. A foundational doctrine. There are a lot of issues that Christians disagree on. You know, how to run a church, structures of leadership, end times things, how salvation works. There's a lot of different subjects that Christians disagree on. But the one that we're all supposed to agree on is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God. That there's a Trinity, triunity, one God in three. And yet, when we begin discussing this with Christians, including with pastors, we get a response something like, well, it's beyond me, I just have to believe it. That's what we're taught, that's what has been handed down to us, so we just have to believe it, but we don't understand it. We can't understand it. So, I'm guessing 25 years ago now, I had a seasoned, older Episcopal priest who was a friend of mine, and I was about to be teaching in seminary on the subject of the Trinity. And he said to me, let me read you a verse from the Bible, Psalm 131:1. O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me. And then he proceeded to tell me I had no business teaching on the Trinity because it was just above us all. Probably the greatest Baptist preacher in the history of Baptist preachers was a man by the name of Charles Spurgeon back in the 19th century in London. And he wrote beautiful books, and he wrote a 3-volume commentary on the Psalms that is still marvelous. And he was a great preacher. He was called the Prince of Preachers. At the age of 19, Charles Spurgeon was pastoring a church of 6,000 people in London. People came from literally around the world to hear him preach. Here's what he said about the Trinity. In attempting to define the Trinity, or to unveil the essence of divinity, many men have lost themselves. Here, great ships have foundered. What have we to do in such a sea in our small skiffs? In other words, Spurgeon was saying it's too complicated for us to even think about. Now, here's what happens. We say, we can't even delve into it. It's over our heads. We can't understand it. We can't fathom it. The Trinity. We believe it, but we can't explain it. To which every cult member worth their salt will say, yep, you can't explain it because it's not true. You can't explain it because it doesn't make sense. And then they would proceed to tell us that God the Father and God the Son are two different beings, or that God God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are one God only in the sense that they all belong to the God Club. They're all a part of some divine committee. Or they would spew out what we know as heresy because we never gave a good answer to them to understand how the Trinity works. What I'm going to be teaching for the next several weeks, in this very room, a dozen years ago, I was asked to teach a group of Muslim students about the Trinity. And so this room was filled with Muslim students. Muslims refuse and reject Christianity because you don't believe in one God. No matter how much you say, yes, we do. No, you believe in three gods. Those Muslims sat here in this class, and at the end of it was a 2-night session. At the end of the session, they came to me and said, obviously you haven't converted us, but we understand now. You don't believe in three gods. You really do believe in one God. And I had a woman who is a dear friend of mine now, who was raised Muslim in Africa, came to the United States, married a Christian, never converted to the Christian faith because you guys believe in three gods. She is one of the most wonderful, splendid women I know, good, godly, sweet, kind, lives like Jesus, but wouldn't embrace the faith because of that. And I went to a church in her city and I taught on the Trinity. And she got it. And within a short time, she was baptized into the Christian faith. And then I had the joy of going back to her town and confirming her into the church. And I dedicated my book on the Trinity to her. So it is understandable. It is something that we can wrestle with and think about and come to terms with. But because pastors and teachers and bishops and priests have not equipped the people of God to understand it, Christian folk are just open prey to every knock on the door that wants to come in and tell you you're wrong. Those knocks on the door are usually one of two things. The first is what I would call, what everybody would call, tritheism. And that is, there are three gods. The Father is a God, the Son is a different God, the Holy Spirit is a different God. Some aberrant religions even teach that the Father and the Son each have their own physical bodies. Here's the problem. That sounds crazy, but I have to tell you, me, being raised a preacher's kid in a church that believed in the Trinity, went to a Bible school that was essentially Trinitarian, and used to get into knockdown dragouts with fellow students because they were telling me, you're not a Trinitarian, you're a tritheist. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't believe in three gods. But you know what? I believed in three gods. I was so screwed up in my understanding. I'd never been taught to understand the Trinity. I have a very close friend, son of a preacher, raised in the faith, as close as a brother, hint, hint, who said to me one time, years ago, don't be trying to tell me Jesus is God. I'm like, brother, you were raised in the Christian faith. That's foundation. No, we weren't taught to understand the Trinity or how it works. So tritheism, that's the one. Knock on the door. Can you explain to me your understanding of God? Trinity. What do you mean by that? God in three in one. Can you explain that? No. Oh, okay. Well, here, let me explain it to you. And they will proceed to teach you tritheism. That God the Father is the maker of all things, and he made his son. At some point in the future, he made his son, and his son became man, and the Holy Spirit is another God, and there's three different gods. That's called tritheism. And from the earliest of times, it was understood in the church as blatant heresy. The other knock on the door that comes is exactly the opposite of that. It's called modalism. I'm giving you a couple of theological terms here tonight. Modalism. Modalism. And it teaches that there's one God, but he functions in three different modes. And the analogy they use is he's an actor, and he wears three different costumes, three different outfits, three different masks on stage. So here he is as the Father, and then he goes backstage and steps out as the Son, and then he goes backstage and steps out as the Holy Spirit. But there's only one God, but there's three different manifestations of that one God. There's three different presentations of that one God, but only one God. It's called sequential manifestations. And it goes something like, okay, in the Old Testament stories, he's the Father. And then he becomes the Son in the Gospels. And then when Jesus ascends and goes into heaven, he becomes the Holy Spirit. So it's the Father becoming the Son, becoming the Holy Spirit, sequential manifestations of one God in three different outfits. The things I'm going to be teaching for the next 6 or 7 weeks are designed to burn down those two ideas and to build a solid biblical historic understanding of how there is one God who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now you may be sitting here right now going, well, I don't understand it. That's fine. That's what this class is for. You're going to understand it as we dig into it. So, I'm almost finished with the introduction tonight, but let me continue by saying the first reason I wrote this book and the first reason I've been so invested in teaching this class is because of basic Christian ignorance. But the second reason is we as Christians find ourselves between a rock and a hard place. Here's the rock. There are tons of good books out there that thick by brilliant theologians from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, from the 18th century, from the 20th century, from the 21st century, that I guarantee you're never going to read. Because they're deep, they're complex, they're big, they're hard to read, they're hard to understand. So there's some great material on the Trinity that nobody's going to read except scholars. Inaccessible to the common person. But on the other hand, you go into the Christian bookstore and say, I would like a book on the Trinity. You know, I went into a Christian bookstore once in Sherman, and I was looking for a copy of John Calvin's Institutes, written in the late 1500s. I said, do you have John Calvin's Institute? And the lady at the desk said, I don't think so. Is that something he's written lately? No, he's been dead 500 years. So you go to this typical Christian bookstore, and what you're going to get is pablum. What you're going to get is milk at best. You're going to get something that a person will read and go, okay, and they'll walk away and still don't understand the Trinity. Or at worst, you're going to get something in a Christian bookstore that's garbage and that's heretical. So my goal, in fact, I think my goal in a lot of my ministry and a lot of my teaching, and in writing this book and other books I've written, my goal is to take that complex stuff and make it understandable to regular folk. Let's talk for a minute about food. In the last 7 years, I have fallen in love with cooking. Learning to cook, experimenting, trying new recipes, Before Shirley passed away, I tell people I couldn't cook macaroni and cheese. I couldn't cook anything. And now I love to cook. But let me tell you something. There is a difference between beef jerky and filet mignon. And I like them both. But if somebody wants meat, come over for supper. We're going to have some meat. And I give them a plate of beef jerky. They're going to be disappointed. Because beef jerky is hard to eat. It's chewy. It hurts your teeth sometimes. It's not particularly enjoyable, and certainly not as a meal. But if you take a nice filet and you cook it just right, medium rare is how it should be, and you make a nice French sauce to go with it, and you plate it and you serve it, you're still giving them nourishment, but it's enjoyable. It's a moment. It's something to remember. My goal in theology is to take the big rocks and break them down, to take the tough meat and tenderize it, cook it, make it palatable to the average person. So something meaty, yet chewable and tasty. That's my goal in what we're going to do for the next several weeks as we look at understanding the Holy Trinity. Two more things and I'm finished. The Holy Trinity is like the ocean. All theology, it's like the ocean. There are depths. You can go as deep as you want to go. There are depths that no one has ever gone that deep. But because the ocean is scary to some people, they never get past their ankles. They never get past their ankles. They never get out to where they can put on their goggles and snorkel and look and see these gorgeous fish and these corals. And they've never been out there because they're afraid to venture out. I hope to be a guide for all of us theologically to take those little boats that Charles Spurgeon was talking about out into the deep water. Not to danger, but to beauty. I'll leave you with this. G.K. Chesterton, he wrote a book in 1904, Why I Believe in Christianity. G.K. Chesterton was a brilliant writer, hugely influential on C.S. Lewis, a Catholic writer. And he was writing, this is more than a century ago, mind you. He was writing about the difference between Eastern Muslim thinking and Western Christian thinking. And he wrote, Christianity, which is a very mystical religion, has nevertheless been the religion of the most practical section of mankind. It has far more paradoxes than the Eastern philosophies, but it also builds far better roads. The Muslim has pure logic conception of God. One monistic Allah, one God. But he remains a barbarian in Europe, and the grass will not grow where he sets his foot. Christian has a triune God, a tangled Trinity. That's his phrase, a tangled Trinity, which seems a mere capricious contradiction in terms. But in action, he bestrides the earth, and even the cleverest Eastern can only fight him by imitating him first. The East has logic and lives on rice. That's a little bit of a racist thing, but 150 years ago. The East has logic and lives on rice. Christendom has mysteries and motor cars. My whole point in reading that is to get to that phrase. We Christians, he says, have a tangled Trinity. My goal over the next 6, 7, 8 weeks is to untangle the Trinity for you so that you will walk away from this series understanding who God is and being able to share with that knock at the door, here is the true Christian faith. So I invite you to join with me, buckle up, and let's dig in and learn together about the beautiful, beautiful qualities and nature of the one who made us. Thank you. I don't know if there's anything to comment on.